My clock just went to 6 p.m., so allow me to formally begin this conversation tonight. I welcome you all to our program. This is the Cambridge Riding Debate on the Environment. Thanks to each of you for attending and being a part of 100 debates across the country on the environment. My name is Mike Farwell, and I'm the host of the Mike Farwell Show on 570 News. I will be your moderator for tonight's debate, and I'm so happy to have been asked to do this. Let's begin by taking a moment for a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that Waterloo Region and the Grand River watershed are located on the traditional territory of Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral peoples. We recognize the enduring presence of the Indigenous people that we share this land with today and their contributions to our community. Thank you. Now, I would like to welcome and thank our Cambridge candidates for being here this evening for this important discussion. Joining us this evening in alphabetical order of party name, Michele Braniff with the Green Party of Canada, Bryan May with the Liberal Party of Canada, and Lorne Bruce with the New Democratic Party of Canada. We invited the four parties that are part of the federal leaders debate. Candidate Connie Cody from the Conservative Party of Canada was invited but declined the invitation to participate tonight. Michele, Bryan, Lorne, welcome, and thanks to each of you for participating tonight. This debate is part of the 100 debates on the environment, where voters will hear directly from candidates invited to express their views about the environment. This national, non-partisan project that aims to bring voters together at the riding level to hear candidates' best policy ideas for the environment. So here's how things are going to work during this format tonight. The debate is going to start with a 1-minute introductory statement from each candidate. Then we will have 8 questions in the first section. These have been developed with input from the 100 Debates standard questions, as well as contributions from environmental organizations that are active in the region of Waterloo. These 8 questions have been sent to the candidates in advance, and each candidate will be given 2 minutes to respond. Then, in the second part of the debate, we start with a rapid response question, just one. I only have 30 seconds to pose the question, and you, our candidates, have only 30 seconds to respond. Then there are 4 audience questions that have been solicited from the community here in Waterloo Region. Organizers received numerous questions submitted in the weeks leading up to this debate from local community members and organizations. Our thanks to everyone who submitted questions for us here tonight. These have not been sent to the candidates in advance. Candidates will have 2 minutes each to respond to those listener questions as well. And finally, there will be 2 minutes each for candidates to provide concluding remarks. Now, we have one additional opportunity for candidates to speak during our discussion tonight, and I'm really looking forward to how this one works. Each candidate has been given 2 wildcard options, which candidates you will activate by selecting the raised hand option on the Zoom menu or just raising your hand. There are only 3 of you for me to keep track of, so I should be able to do it. Take your choice. We'll know when you want to activate one of those wildcards. Now, this wildcard provides you with an opportunity to respond to points made by the other candidates or to restate your own position. You have 1 minute when you use a wildcard. You only have 2 wildcards, and they may be used after each of the 3 candidates have finished answering the question. You may choose when to use the wildcards or not to use them at all. In order for this event to be safe and inclusive to all, we are setting some community ground rules tonight. Firstly, there will be absolutely no tolerance for hate speech, personal attacks towards candidates or other participants, or anything of the like. In order to have productive conversations and a healthy democracy, respect for one another is absolutely essential. Secondly, we have a timer on duty tonight. When you have 15 seconds left, you will see Laura, our timer, signal you with a yellow card. When your time is up, a red card will be shown. I'd ask that you please respect the timing and stick to your allotted time. If you continue to speak after the red card has been shown, I will be ruthless. Okay, not quite. I will also be respectful, but I will interrupt at the earliest opportunity and move on to the next person. So 15 seconds yellow. When you see that red card, please bring to an end that particular thought and we can move on. The order of candidates to begin tonight was decided at random. We are going to start first with Michele, second will be Lorne, and the last will be Bryan. Each new question, whoever answered second previously will answer first, and who answered first previously will answer last. We will continue to cycle through to alternates who answer first and last with each question. So when we start with Michele on the introductory statements, we'll move on to the questions and Lorne will get to answer the first question first. Bryan will answer question 2 first, and so on and so forth. During this debate for the environment tonight, I encourage candidates to go beyond just what your parties are or are not doing on the environment, and to talk specifically about what you would do as an MP. We would like to know what you, if elected MP, would do to help solve these environmental challenges. I know that's a lot to digest, but I also know, having done this with each of you before, you are kind of seasoned at this. So if we're all feeling like we're in our comfortable places, we'll begin. I see nods across the screens. Terrific. Thank you all for dealing with that. And I will make sure we keep it in check as we move along. So let's get to our 1-minute introductory statements and then move on to those 8 preset questions. Michele, we're going to begin with you, as we mentioned, with your introductory candidate statement. You have 1 minute.
Thanks, Mike. I'm really glad to be here. And I was grateful that you started with a land acknowledgement. It's important. This is my 3rd time running for the Green Party of Canada in Cambridge. And I began in 2015 because I wanted there to be a green voice as part of democracy. But the need for crisis action has become more and more urgent. And I think now Cambridge needs me in Ottawa as your Green MP. My background includes time as a lawyer, a mediator, an entrepreneur. I was a small business advisor and I worked with youth, new Canadians, and persons with disabilities. I had a management position in the nonprofit sector, specifically mental health. So I'm very familiar with issues around mental health and addiction. I teach college. My favorite course is social justice, social policy, and change. I have a passion for social innovation, both in my work with my agency and a graduate diploma. I have a green recovery plan. Vote for me for your grandchildren's grandchildren.
Thank you very much, Michele. A good start on the red card. We wrapped up and we'll move next to Lorne for introductory statements. And Lorne, you now have 1 minute.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks for the organizers. We all know how challenging it is to reach out to folks and have conversations during a pandemic when the election was called. So I'd like to begin to say that what brought me here was that well over a decade ago, I had a meeting with my family, my young family, and said I was thinking about throwing my hat in the ring. And so part of that conversation, and my kids were a little bit younger at that point, and said, Dad, why do you want to do this? And I said, because I'm worried about your future. So I've spent the past decade or so in various roles. It's given me the opportunity because I'm the political action chair for the Waterloo Regional Labor Council. I'm also on the political action for my local union. And that's given me the ability to lobby at the federal level, the provincial level, and municipal level. So the bottom line is what I said to my kids was, I will fight for all the injustices that we see within our society, but the overriding agenda that we have to tackle is the climate crisis.
Thank you very much, Lorne. And now on to Bryan May. Introductory remarks, Mr. May, 60 seconds.
Thank you very much, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here and speak with everyone today. It's been my honor to serve as your member of parliament for Cambridge for almost 6 years. I lived in Cambridge for nearly 20 years, and I'm a graduate of the University of Waterloo. As your member of parliament, the work I'm most proud of is the fact that more than 300,000 children have been lifted out of poverty since we took government. Affordable housing being built in Cambridge. We've increased the GIS for 900,000 seniors and lifted about 57,000 seniors out of poverty. I'm running to build upon the progress that we've made over the past 6 years. Make no mistake, we are at a critical moment. If we don't finish the fight against COVID-19, or if we have an uneven recovery for people, they will be left behind. The fact is that our economy is strong, poverty is declining, and our government has done more for the environment than any in Canadian history. That's what I'm fighting for. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bryan. Okay, introductory remarks have been completed. Let's move on to those preset questions. These have been sent to our candidates in advance. And Lorne, you are going to get the opportunity to answer first on these preset questions. You'll have 2 minutes for your reply and continue to watch Laura for that yellow card, then the red card. Our first question with Lorne from the NDP first to answer. Will you develop a new and credible plan to halt and reverse nature loss, protect species at risk, and meet Canada's commitment to protect at least 30% of land, freshwater, and ocean by 2030? Lorne.
Short answer, yes, absolutely. We know that the Canadian Environmental Protection Act hasn't been updated in over 20 years. There was a bill put forward, it didn't pass first reading, and of course they called the election, so it died at that point. So we will revise it absolutely and expand on it and make improvements to it. You know, we talk about endangered species, but we should also talk about invasive species, because as we see the climate change, we see different species coming up into different climate zones, if you were, and that has a dramatic effect on so many of the biosphere. And you know, I have to talk about this in a holistic point of view, because so many of these things have ripple effects, whether it's the economy. So when you're talking about species of fish, then you're talking about the fishing industry. When you're talking about agriculture and the agriculture industry, then you're looking at invasive species that way. So, you know, we're all in this together. So all political stripes, I'm thrilled to be here with my two cohorts, if you were. And I look forward to not only talking about the NDP plan, but I'm really interested to hear from what these guys. I'm sure I'll learn something from them as well.
All right,
Thanks, Mike.
Lorne, thank you very much for that answer to our first question. I will restate the question just for the benefit of our audience, since we don't have a screen for them to look at. Bryan, you're next to answer. Will you develop a new and credible plan to halt and reverse nature loss, protect species at risk, and meet Canada's commitment to protect at least 30% of land, freshwater, and ocean by 2030? Bryan.
Thank you, Mike. And the answer, of course, is yes. The Liberals are committed to protect at least 30% of land, freshwater, and oceans by 2030. We have already protected vast new areas of our land and waters. When we came into government, Canada had protected less than 1% of our oceans, and we're now at 14%. We've protected a landmass equal to 3.5 times the size of Nova Scotia. We also made the 2 largest investments in nature conservation in Canadian history, $1.3 billion in budget 2018 and $3.3 billion in budget 2021. And we have an ambitious plan to do more, including 10 new national parks, 10 new national marine conservation areas, and 15 new national urban parks. We are committed to the 30% by 2030 target, and we have a proven track record on nature protection to get us there. And I think as we move closer, I think that target will also improve.
Thank you very much, Bryan. And now over to Michele on our first preset question. Will you develop a new and credible plan to halt and reverse nature loss, protect species at risk, and meet Canada's commitment to protect at least 30% of land, freshwater, and ocean by 2030?
We plan to meet and exceed that goal. So I mentioned the Green Recovery Plan. Part of it is to conserve and restore natural ecosystems. So protecting more than 30% by 2030, more than 50% by 2050. We want to halt habitat destruction by 2030, start restoration by 2050, a national biodiversity regeneration strategy. We want to enhance federal science capacity so that we can have an inventory of ecosystems, species at risk, invasive species, as Lorne mentioned, and also a national forest strategy. So planting billions of trees, biodiverse, that's part of fire mitigation. We also want to preserve old growth forests. And that's really, really important. We've got forests in BC that the trees are thousands of years old, and they're being protected by Indigenous elders and their allies in the Fairy Creek blockade. We need the entire nation to be behind that, not the RCMP blocking it.
Thank you very much, Michele. Okay, we will move on to our second preset question. And just to let you know, I'm kind of making this up as I go along tonight, not the questions, but I thought that just it might be easier for you to hear the question repeated. I don't like the feel of that. So what I'm going to do, unless Laura or Tim jump in and say, don't do that anymore, I'm going to put the question into the chat as well after I've posed it, just for you as you're following along, that you know what question has been asked and our candidates then are able to answer the question, and you know that they are addressing the question that's been set. They know the questions already since they have been preset. So for the benefit of our audience, I'll pop it into the chat after it's been asked. Just another point of housekeeping here. Okay, Tim's going to do that. Awesome. So second question, and Bryan, we're going to start with you on this one. Indigenous people play a critical role in environmental solutions. Will you implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and calls to action in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission? And will you invest in Indigenous-led land use planning and the establishment of Indigenous protected and conserved areas?
Thank you, Mike. And yes, the Liberal government supports UNDRIP and passed an act earlier this year to ensure that the principles are implemented. For those unfamiliar with the UNDRIP Act, it requires the Government of Canada to work in consultation and cooperation with Indigenous peoples to prepare an action plan to address key things such as addressing injustices and to identify measures to align federal laws with UNDRIP. Implementing the Act will be a key part of renewing the relationship between the Government of Canada and Indigenous peoples. I absolutely 100% support this effort and the important work that needs to be done on reconciliation. 80% of the calls to action, the recommendations for the federal government under the Truth and Reconciliation Report are either completed or well underway. And we are absolutely committed to completing the rest of them. The Prime Minister has said there is no relationship more important than that of between the Government of Canada and First Nations peoples.
Thank you very much, Bryan. And Lorne, you will get to answer next on this question, and you have 2 minutes to respond.
So obviously the relationship that we have with our Indigenous partners is key to solving and mitigating and reducing our transmission and transitioning to a green economy. So we are proposing that we will fund the Indigenous-led conservation projects, and to also help Indigenous people become a part of the process. We're proposing to set up an Office of Environmental Justice in conjunction with the Canadian Environmental Bill of Rights. Because quite often it's the marginalized, the racialized Indigenous folks that take the brunt of a lot of the climate crisis in this country. So they need an avenue and a path forward to correct those wrongs. And of course we support all the recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Report. I was a very proud member of the NDP when my friend Robio Saginash was in the House and announced the UN Declaration. And now this isn't directly environmental, but I think it's important that we're also proposing to set up a special prosecutor to get to the bottom of what happened to those kids that have been discovered. And I think if we really want to have reconciliation and a partnership with Indigenous peoples, we need to show them that we care, we mean it, and they need to have a sense of closure, if I can put it that way. And we need to treat it as a crime, because it was.
Thank you very much, Lorne. And Michele, you get to answer last on this question.
This is a very important issue to me. I try very hard to be an ally and a better ally all the time to Indigenous people. So back before 2008, I spent a weekend with a group of Indigenous and settler people trying to figure out a way that Canada could have a truth and reconciliation process. It happened a few years after our meeting. I think we might have had something to do with that. At that time, I learned that there were a whole lot of recommendations in the 1996 report of the Royal Commission on Indigenous People. If they had been implemented right away, we would have had a big head start to where we are now. So better now than continue to wait. And the Liberals have made a good start. We need to really accelerate this. So yes, all 94 of the Truth and Reconciliation recommendation, all the calls for justice in the final report of the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. And we absolutely support Indigenous-led implementation of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. It needs to be a nation-to-nation relationship. And I think everyone here is probably very committed to that.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Michele. And to each of our candidates, let's move on to preset question number 3. And Michele, we will come to you first for the answer on this one. Your third question. This summer, the discovery of 215 unmarked graves at Kamloops Residential School sparked a reckoning. Since then, more than 1,500 unmarked graves have been found on residential school grounds. How will you continue that investigation and work towards reconciliation for the atrocities committed at those places? Michele, you're first, 2 minutes to answer.
So by way of background, in 2009, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada asked for 1.5 million to identify burial sites. That was denied. That was the Harper government. Currently now, there's no easy way to access funds. The Truth and Reconciliation began the work, but they were underfunded. They focused on the calls to action 72 to 76. The Liberal government's made a commitment, and it's important that we do follow through on that and support that investigation in the healing. Settler people had a visceral reaction to this terrible event, although it was all in the reports, sadly. The other thing we need to do is to recognize that the Indigenous child removal system that began with the residential schools continued with the 60 scoop, but it's not over yet. So in August 26th of 2021, the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal was still dealing with clarification of rulings. There was a ruling made prior to 2015 that there was inequitable funding to First Nations on reserves for child welfare. So that's not resolved yet. That there needs to be a settlement that needs to be fixed. What happens is the whole rest of Canada, if there's neglect, child welfare is funded and they work with the family. On reserves, the funding isn't there. And a lot of the children are removed and they're not placed with kin. So in part of the reconciliation is to make sure that we address the inequities in the child welfare system that continue.
Thanks, Michele. Bryan, over to you for the answer to our third question.
So look, the unmarked graves at former residential school sites are clearly a tragic reminder of the dark part of our history in this country. My office over the summer received hundreds of calls and emails from concerned Cambridge residents, and many of whom had never heard of what had happened, and to the scope of what had happened. We really have just started down this process, and people need to prepare themselves for the numbers that will come. Our government is absolutely committed in seeing this through. We will appoint a special interlocutor who will work with Indigenous communities to develop the necessary legal and regulatory framework to advance justice regarding unmarked graves. We will provide the necessary supports for communities who wish to continue to undertake the work of burial searches at these former sites and of these institutions. We have provided resources to assist communities in their work and funding, where we have announced $320 million to help discover these graves, support the survivors, and help Canada confront this dark chapter of our past. One of the most moving conversations I had from a resident who called was that of a new Canadian, somebody who had moved here from Bosnia to escape genocide. And he was literally in tears because he didn't know anything about this when coming to Canada and learning about Canada. And that's something as well we need to make sure this is taught in our schools properly. It's part of our citizenship ceremony system, and there's still significantly more work needed to be done.
Thank you, Bryan. And Lorne, to you lastly on our third question here tonight.
Well, firstly, Michele, you're absolutely right. We need to revise the system when it comes to the child welfare of Indigenous folks. It's still going on today. And Bryan, I'm glad you mentioned the word genocide, because I believe that's exactly what it was. And I understand what you're saying about appointing an officer, but I think that we need to take it in a more prosecutorial way, because I think that's the only way we're going to get to the records. And the survivors who have been telling us these stories for years, and now we've finally discovered where some of these kids are, and unfortunately there's going to be more, I believe. But we need to, like I said before, if we're going to have a sense of closure for these folks, we need to dig right down through all the records, and we have to be able to get those records from the government files, if they exist, and from the churches. And I don't believe you can get through it unless you go through and treat it like a crime that it was. So if we're serious about this, I think that's how we need to treat it.
Thank you very much, candidates. We will move on to our fourth of our preset questions here this evening. And Lorne, you will be provided first opportunity to answer on this question, which reads as follows. All 8 municipal governments have committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2050, with an interim target of a 50% reduction by 2030. How will you, as a local representative, help make that happen? Lorne, you're first.
Well, so I absolutely agree that a lot of the environmental solutions that we're going to find are going to come from the local level. We've seen examples of that in many jurisdictions. So whatever at the federal level, because again, I'll come back to the fact that we're all in this together, whether you're municipal, provincial, federal, corporate, public, like the public, we're all in this together. It's all hands on deck. It's a complex issue, but it's something we all need to wrap our heads around if we're going to actually make a difference. We can set a goal, but a goal is a goal. So we need to get there. We need to actually do the things that are going to happen. So if a municipal government is requesting certain help on the financing of something, we got to be there for them, and vice versa. We have to have those conversations because it's going to be a joint effort and it's going to be a collaborative thing. So, I look at it in not to oversimplify it, and I'm not saying one is more important than the other, but I look at it there's a mitigation strategy, there's a reduction strategy, and there's a transition strategy. And like I said, it's not one or the other. All three have to happen at the same time. So it's a collaborative, and we all have to do our part to make this happen.
Thank you very much, Lorne. And Michele, your response to our fourth preset question.
So the Green Party is on board with cutting emissions. The Green Party goals would be 60% of the 2005 levels by 2030. So more than the municipalities, net negative by 2050. So that's the most ambitious of the parties. The Green Party would set clear enforceable targets. So in 2023, we've got these targets. So we'd be working with the municipalities at the federal side. We also need to look after the municipalities in terms of, as Lorne says, there is a lot of things they have to do. So currently municipalities have only 10.8% of all tax revenues. So that needs to increase. So there's currently a gas tax fund, and the Green Party would change its name to the Municipal Fund, and that's federal transfers to the municipalities, and we double that. We also, the federal Canadian municipalities have asked for permanent dedicated federal public transit fund. They've asked for $3.4 billion annually starting in 2026. So that's when the current program ends. The Green Party is in support of that. And, there have to be multi-year solutions. The Green Party is also suggesting a national transportation strategy to get us to zero carbon public ground transportation all across Canada by 2040. And that would be a rail plus light rail plus electric bus, and have joint review panels with federal and provincial transportation ministers so they can collaborate. What we need for the municipalities are better connections. So a national transportation strategy, which the Green Parties are recommended, would help the municipalities reach their goals.
Thanks very much, Michele. And on to Bryan.
Thank you. I've been very supportive of local efforts, including municipal efforts to curb greenhouse gas emissions. I applaud those efforts and the election of municipal leaders who are taking this approach and working to make our communities greener. I will continue to work with my municipal counterparts to provide support and funding to help in those efforts. Municipalities are taking many steps, and I've already been helping them in several ways. For municipal vehicles, for example, I've been supporting green vehicle programs as chair of the Auto Caucus in Ottawa. For things like transit, our government funds transit programs to help them reach those reduction goals. For local infrastructure like water treatment facilities, we've made massive strides in funding for municipalities to help with things such as gas capture at these sites. And there are many, many more examples. Fighting climate change is, and it has to be, a team effort. We need federal programs and provincial funds and municipal initiatives in order to get us to a greener future. I'm going to continue to be an ally at all levels of government and business that want to make a difference in reducing greenhouse emissions. I'll give a shout out to Veriform, a gentleman by the name of Paul Rack, who works in a very carbon intensive, emission intensive industry, steel pressing. They had 100 different initiatives over the last number of years, reduce their carbon footprint by 75%, and at the same time saving over $1 million a year. That is a type of transition we need, not just in our municipalities, but in businesses throughout the community.
Great. Thanks very much, Bryan. I think they just won an award as one of the annual champions from Sustainable Waterloo Region, did they not, at Veriform?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I had a chance to talk to Paul about that. Just fascinating stuff. Really, really incredible. Okay, our fifth preset question. And Michele, you are going to be provided the opportunity to respond first to question number 5, which reads as follows. Will you commit to a green and just pandemic recovery? We ask that in your answer, you specifically state what you would do to address how women, people of color, and other marginalized groups have been disproportionately affected by both the pandemic and our environmental crisis?
So environmental racism is the fact that the impact of the degradation in ecosystems disproportionately affects vulnerable populations, people of color, Indigenous people in Canada. And there was a bill C-230. It was the private member's bill, National Strategy Respecting Environmental Racism, Environmental Justice Act. And Green Party would support the passing of that legislation. We also are in favor of an independent, nonpartisan council. So with Indigenous people, climate scientists, researchers, youth, they're the next generation, representatives of the community to really focus on environmental racism. There's research that connects things like trees and gardens to health. And municipalities often don't have as many trees or green spaces in neighborhoods where it's lower socioeconomic, and the health is impacted. So the Green Party is in favor of universal access to green spaces, national parks, and partnerships with municipalities. So part of the platform of the Green Party, part of our Green Recovery Plan, is actually dismantling systemic discrimination. And I talked about some of the Indigenous pieces. There's also implementing the report of the UN Working Group of Experts on People of African Descent on its mission to Canada. So that was with respect to discrimination in federal employment. So policing has been something with a lot of attention. And one of the things that we can do, because there are issues around the disproportionate, it came up during the pandemic, we would address that as well.
Thanks very much, Michele. And on to Bryan.
Yes, the Liberal government has already committed to and funded a green just pandemic recovery. Since last September, we've invested $53.6 billion towards a green recovery. Canada has recovered 92% of the jobs lost during COVID, compared to just 75% to our neighbors to the south in the United States. We've introduced $10 a day childcare to help women and marginalized communities re-enter the workforce and reduce their costs. We have 8 provinces on board, and we're working on the last 2. We've funded special programs to help women in trades, Black entrepreneurs, and other programs to help marginalized groups. We will recognize for the first time in federal law the right to a healthy environment. We're going to continue to train workers so they have the skills to work in a zero carbon industry. Liberals know how to both protect the environment and grow the economy, and we're determined to do so.
Thank you, Bryan. And on to Lorne for your response to the 5th preset question.
Yeah, and I touched on this earlier when I was talking about people being affected maybe more than others. And that's when I was referring to the Canadian Environmental Bill of Rights that we want to establish, and an Office of Environmental Justice, so that these folks have a pathway to seek some sort of, to correct the situation. And it actually touches on something else when we talk about affordable housing. Again, a lot of these things go together. And quite often when we see your large urban centers, affordable housing is built on maybe lands that are more in the industrial nature, and these folks are directly affected by lax environmental protection, and or maybe a lack of enforcing the environmental assessment. So we see this all the time. And Bryan, I have to thank you for the reference to the universal child care. It's something I've been harping on for decades. My daughter's 25 now, so it's not going to help me, but it's something that I've been looking for over 30 years. But so again, I go to the fact that this is all of us are involved in this, and all of us are affected in some way, shape, or form, whether economically or directly environment. And, we have to be honest with folks. There's going to be some difficult transition. There's going to be some pain, but it's something we all have to pull together and work through, because, it's the future of our children's children and the future of the planet and the future of all of us. So it's great to see that the three of us are sort of basically agreeing that we agree how huge an issue this is, and we may have different policy difference on how to tackle it, but I think we're all here thinking the same thing.
Thank you very much, Lorne. And I see Michelle's hand raised. So first wild card being used of the evening. Okay, here we go. You get a minute on this wild card response, Michele.
I wanted to come back and review some other aspects to the justice in the platform of the Green Party. So expanding the national the health Canada Health Act to have pharmacare. The Green Party's got a wonderful idea with respect to starting off with centralized buying, and that will make it more fiscally sound. Also including basic dental care over a period of time. We're also in favor of childcare with early childhood education, and to make sure that mental health and addictions and the opioid poisoning are also dealt with as part of health. And that's
Thank you very much, Michele. So Michele has one wild card remaining. Our other candidates still have two apiece should they decide to use them during our conversation tonight. On to our sixth preset question we go. Bryan, you are going to get the chance to answer this one first. And your question is, it has been over a decade since Canada first committed to ending fossil fuel subsidies. Will you push your party's leadership to end all government subsidies for fossil fuels?
The answer is yes, and I don't really have to push that hard. We will eliminate fossil fuel production subsidies, and it's in fact in the Liberal platform. It commits us to doing so by 2023, 2 years faster than previous commitments. We are also setting a cap and limits on the total emissions from the oil and gas sector in Canada, which is an incredible step towards getting to net zero. We'll also develop a plan to phase out public financing of the fossil fuel sector, including from Crown corporations such as Export Development Canada.
Thank you very much, Bryan. On to Lorne for an answer to our sixth question.
Well, I'm glad to hear that answer, Bryan, because I've been lobbying both Conservative and Liberal governments for decades. It's been part of our platform for decades that we need to stop subsidizing that industry. Now, but understanding that we need to use that money for, like I said, the mitigation, reduction, and transition strategies, and help with the creation with the national crisis strategy as when we react to major crises that are climate driven, and also, those subsidies, that money for subsidies for oil and gas, could also go to the green infrastructure investment, R&D, and also the transition of workers in that industry. So. And it's not just the workers in the oil and gas industry, but it's all the ripple effect for all the communities and all the business surrounding it, right? Like I said, this is not going to be a silver bullet going to solve this. We need to take a holistic approach, but we need to get serious about it. And like I said, I've been screaming from the hilltops about oil and gas subsidies, saying it's been the wrong way to go for a number of years.
Thank you very much, Lorne. And on to Michele for an answer to our sixth preset question, please.
It should have happened already. The climate crisis, every month, every year that we delay moving fast enough makes the work steeper, makes it more difficult. It seems we need a different way of thinking about this. Like, we're not in this era where the economy is some kind of machine that you prime the pump and hope that things trickle down. We need the government to be like a farmer or a gardener and create conditions. So if Canada doesn't move fast enough with respect to the transition from oil and gas to a green economy, we will be left behind on the global economy. We'll, we shouldn't have been buying pipelines, and we had that discussion already, Brian. So one of the things that needs to happen is support for the displaced workers because the multinational corporations, they'll bounce back, but we want to make sure that there's support to help the workers transition to the green economy. The Green Party is in favor of a guaranteed livable income. It helps Canadians in times like a pandemic or in times of transition. It was recommended in 1943 in the Marsh Report, and again in the MacDonald Commission in the 1960s. And it's more than time now. And certainly with CERB, it would be an easy transition. And that's part of what we can do to help the workers transition to the green economy.
Thank you very much, Michele. Okay, let's move on to our 7th preset question. Lorne, oh, I'm sorry, Brian, you even had your hand up on the screen. My apologies. Brian, using one of your wild cards, 60 seconds.
Thank you, Mike. Just wanted to touch base. I noticed there was a question in the chat about coal, and I think it's important to identify that the Liberal platform has in it a ban of import, export, and transit through Canada of thermal coal. So that is something we are committing to. Also, I just wanted to there's just in the suggestion that maybe we hadn't started eliminating these subsidies. In fact, we have. A lot of the reports that are out there suggest that some of these subsidies that are included in some of these reports, I wouldn't consider, and I don't think most Canadians would consider oil and gas subsidy. An example would be the wage subsidy during COVID that protected workers, the cleaning up of abandoned oil wells, the funding that the development of clean technology to move oil and gas away from oil and gas. I don't think most Canadians would agree that those are subsidies.
All right. Thank you very much, Brian. Sorry again for missing the virtual hand the first time. I'm glad we got you for that wild card. Okay, preset question number 7. And Lorne, you're going to get the opportunity to respond first this time. The Canadian Environmental Protection Act is our overarching law to protect the health and environment of Canadians. The Act has not been significantly amended since 1999, despite major changes in our understanding of toxic substances in our environment. A recent bill introduced in the last Parliament did not make it past first reading. Will you support getting this bill reintroduced, strengthened, and made a top legislative priority? Lorne.
Yes, quite simply. I already touched on this. You're referring to Bill C-28, correct, Mike? And I believe I already answered this question. So I don't know if I want to reiterate that. Yeah, we want to reintroduce it, expand on it, improve it. We talked about the invasive species and whatnot. So I kind of already answered that question, Mike, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
But I can expand on a few other things.
Sure.
A few minutes here.
It's your 2 minutes.
Okay, so there was a question in the chat talking about our north, and I've been a huge proponent for investing a large sum of money for development of our north, because we've seen with the change in climate how the north is going to be completely different, with a lot of other countries developing resources or trying to. We need to reassert our sovereignty up north, and by doing so, it's kind of a win-win, because we can also use that strategy to not only reassert our sovereignty and have some control over environmental issues, but we can also help our Indigenous folks by creating and establishing the health and education and all the social infrastructure that they need as they adjust to this new environment. So it's kind of a, I think we've kind of been lacking in making that investment, and we have to look at the reality of mitigation and what's going on with the climate. And it's a great opportunity, and we know that, like I said, without pointing to certain countries like Scandinavia and Russia and whatnot, and even the Americans, so we need to make those investments up north.
Great. Thank you very much, Lorne. Michele, you're next on our preset question number 7.
Thank you. So absolutely support BC 28 to modernize the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. So in particular, that legislation talks about the right to a healthy environment. And if you look at the history of it, the Blue Dot movement, a Suzuki Foundation, had a petition that was tabled in Parliament, and it expanded on the healthy environment. It defined it to be air, water, safe food, a stable climate, and environmental democracy. So information to citizens, participation in decisions about environment, justice, so that you'd have a remedy. So that's what it means with this right to a healthy environment. When we get this in the updated Canadian Environmental Protection Act, it'll be the first time we'll have that protection in federal legislation. Yes, we need it. But the Blue Dot petition, the movement is pushing for it to be actually in the Charter of Canadian Rights and Freedoms. And so the Charter is a higher level of protection. The Charter supersedes all other legislation, and that is really how I personally would campaign and crusade. There's tracking of environmental democracy. Canada's not in the bottom 10, but we're not in the top 10 either. And I think we can do better.
Thank you very much, Michele. And on to Bryan May.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm glad to have this question. As has already been stated, the Liberals introduced a bill to strengthen the act that governs most toxic chemicals, plastics, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act. When passed, and as Michele mentioned, it would enshrine the right to a healthy environment in federal law. This is a major, major step forward. We need to get the bill passed, and we are open to conversations to improve the bill. We also committed to requiring that consumer products such as cosmetics and cleaning products give people the information they need to understand what's in them. The Liberals are committed to a full review of the legislation governing the use of pesticides to ensure that all new science is considered and the process is more transparent. And to better protect our health and the environment, especially wildlife. Speaking of wildlife, we Liberals have also introduced legislation to phase out toxicity testing on animals. We need to get back into government so that we can pass this legislation. We can get it tabled. We can absolutely review it and talk about it if it needs to be changed or strengthened. But it is an absolute must moving forward.
Thank you very much, Bryan. Okay, we will move on to our 8th and final preset question. Michele, you will be granted first opportunity to answer question number 8. One of our major local concerns is the extraction of aggregate, which affects our watershed. Amid a booming housing market, how will you ensure that new home construction is done sustainably and watersheds like ours are protected? Michele.
So to build on what I said in response to the last question, if we had the right to a healthy environment enshrined in the Charter, that would put us in a way better place to deal with this. It's an interesting question because the royalties and whatever for gravel, for aggregate, is set by the province. There's a private member's bill provincially by Mike Schreiner, the leader of the Green Party of Ontario. It's a bill to protect the Gulf Paris moraine. So if that were law, that would also protect us. So it's that place where the federal and the provincial governments, each have some jurisdiction, but a lot of provincial. So in addition to the charter, which I think is really, really important, in terms of giving Canadians the right to be consulted and the right to protect their water level. There's ways that we can work with the province with national policies. For example, the National Urban Biodiversity Regeneration that I talked about, that kind of a plan would open up some further room for federal provincial discussion. And also if we were able to put in place something to stop habitat destruction, because if you change the water level, it impacts the wildlife. It's an issue that's near and dear to my family. My dad has property with a small lake and a gravel pit that has an impact. So it's it's an important.
Thank you very much, Michele. Bryan, you're next on our 8th preset question.
Thanks, Mike. Aggregates are critically important to our local economy here. It is a big chunk of the economy in North Dumfries and North Brant. But we must remain vigilant to the environmental harms that this extraction can bring. And as Michele pointed out, a lot of this is provincial. So we're going to continue to work with the provinces to make sure that our drinking water and watersheds are protected, and to ensure any extraction is in keeping with the federal and provincial laws. The federal government continues to monitor pits and quarries to ensure they are following the rules and reporting requirements. We in our platform and going all the way back to budget 2017 have pledged to build much more housing, including supports for affordable housing. But the funding to the provinces is contingent on following the rules, including environmental rules. One of the really interesting stories that I've heard recently in conversations, not just with the aggregate industry and cement, but also with home builders. There are home builders in our community right now working with scientists from across Canada to perfect carbon capture in concrete and cement. This would be a game changer for the construction industry. And they, from the stats that I've seen and the work that I've seen, they're there. This is going to be moving forward, something that new home buyers are going to be looking for. New developments are going to be able to use this almost as a marketing tool to say, buy here for a net zero home. And one of the ways they're going to be able to do that is through carbon capture in cement and concrete.
Thanks very much, Bryan. And Lorne, your answer to question number 8.
And thanks a lot to my fellow panelists for explaining your positions. You're right, Bryan. Aggregate is a huge business here in our area. It's also a really hot button issue when you talk to people in the townships and the local municipalities, and they're trying to deal with it. I believe the federal role is definitely to ensure that environmental assessments are done and they have some teeth, and so that this business, part of the business sector, that realize that they can't just do it willy-nilly, and they have to talk to the local communities where they're doing this extraction. And one of the other strategies I was talking about was mitigation. And when I say mitigation, about the effects of the climate crisis, but also we talk about the mitigation about if you're going to do a resource extraction like that, then you must have plans in place to mitigate, to reduce the effects or maybe the unwanted ripple effects of that kind of a development. So we need to put it in place. And like I said about the Environmental Bill of Rights, so if you're a company that is in that kind of extraction business, then you have to take responsibilities for all the ramifications of that kind of endeavor.
All right, Lorne, thank you very much. I see Michele's hand raised for her second and final wild card. So you have 60 seconds, Michele, to respond to something you heard or expand on a previous point.
I just wanted to expand. I forgot to mention, there actually are businesses that do recycled concrete. And currently you can get points under the LEED Green Building Certificate if you use the recycled concrete. It keeps it out of landfill. Then the gravel doesn't need to be mined. So it's not a case of shutting down the building or shutting down, but expanding the options. And the Green Party would be supporting innovative green businesses like this one. So I wanted to use that as another example.
Okay, thank you, Michele. And Lorne has raised his hand for use of a wild card. Go ahead, Lorne, another 60 seconds to you.
Well, I've got to get into this poker game with these wild cards, and it's actually, I'm not sure if my fellow candidates have done this. I've done this in the past, and it's an environmental thing that I'm so proud of. So at the end of the election, what do you do with your election signs? So in 2015, I found a local church in the region, and what they did was they recycled all the signs into, little pieces of material about this big, and they mixed it in with the concrete and asphalt for kids' playgrounds at schools and stuff. And it's kind of a little bit more bouncy and the kind of thing. So I encourage my fellow candidates to do the same, to find a local way to recycle. I know it's not really a wild card, but it's an important thing to do because we all talk about, I'm sure, signs and the environmental impact when we're putting up election signs and stuff. So it's important.
Okay, Lorne, thank you for that. That concludes our preset questions. So we will next move on to the rapid response. It's just one question. I get 30 seconds to ask, and you get 30 seconds to respond. I promise not to go over my time. Bryan, you're going to get the first opportunity to respond on our rapid response question. And here it comes. Another party, not your own, proposes a climate policy and it comes up for a vote. You agree with the plan. Do you vote in support of it? Bryan May.
Yes, very simply. I have voted in support of other parties' policies, opposition motions, private members' bills, even a number of times against the suggestion of my own party when it has been something that either I personally am passionate about or something that I know would support Cambridge.
Thank you very much, Bryan. And on to you, Lorne.
Yes. Bryan and I have this conversation. Good policy is good policy. So why would you not support it? It's bottom line, right? And like I talk about lobbying in different levels of government, whatnot. I believe in working across party lines, right? So if you're dealing with an issue, it's on the table. You agree to disagree, but we still have to deal with the issue. So with my background in negotiations and whatnot, absolutely, I'm more than happy to work across the aisle with my friends.
All right. Thank you very much, Lorne and Michele. Oops, Michele, you just muted yourself. Sorry about that. So let's start her clock over again. Laura's set for that. Michele, you've got 30 seconds.
I have the luxury of being part of the Green Party, where we have the most autonomy of any other party. So the Green Party is known that we don't always vote the same way. We are known to be collaborative. We give credit where credit is due, and we criticize in a respectful, evidence-based way. So my party absolutely would let me do that. And I inquire as to whether yours really would.
All right. Thank you very much, Michele. That concludes our rapid response segment. We now have 4 audience questions to ask. Again, we will go back to 2 minutes for each response. We'll continue to rotate through our candidates. Lorne, you're on deck to answer first. And just a reminder to our audience, these questions, of course, having come from you in conversations with you, our candidates have not seen in advance. So the first audience question, and again, Lorne will begin. It is a 2-minute opportunity for a candidate reply. First question is, Several of our submitted audience questions, in fact, touched on concerns related to pipelines. So, what steps will be taken to right the adverse effects of the Keystone Pipeline and restore the ecosystems this project destroyed? And how will this include reconciliation with Indigenous people who are currently fighting to protect against the environmental destruction of their land? Lorne, you're first.
So again, that touches on some of the proposals that we're making with the Office of Environmental Justice and the Canadian Environmental Bill of Rights. This will give these folks the path to reconcile those issues. It's really important that we hold these quite often multinational companies responsible to fix the errors of their ways. So if they polluted, they clean it up at their expense. So we're already, as taxpayers, all of us are paying for the results of the climate crisis, whether it's the fires in BC or the droughts out west or the flooding we see or higher energy prices after a hurricane hits the southern U.S. We're already paying for that. So I don't think it's a stretch to say that these companies that develop these strategies in these industries that have to pay for the cleanup of and the effects on the environment that they've themselves created.
All right, Lorne, thank you very much. Michele, your response.
Well, absolutely, the companies should pay for them. We have some barriers in the way. Free trade agreements give corporations a lot of rights to litigate, which the Green Party has never been in favor of that. And you also have the challenge that sometimes the companies go bankrupt or they take their money out of the jurisdiction. So there's practical problems in what Lorne's saying. We need government leadership to persevere, and the restoration needs to happen. Pipelines are certainly an ongoing issue and barrier to reconciliation because there's been pipelines on unceded territory where elders are opposed to it. So there's a lot of issues on pipelines, and it's a complex issue, and we would need to work through it in a way that prioritizes people and the planet and is fiscally responsible and has regard to the way the law works, because sometimes that adds extra hurdles.
Thank you very much, Michele. And over to you, Bryan.
Thank you. C69, the Impact Assessment Act, I was very proud to support because it does this. It enshrines into law the requirements necessary to move forward and to be able to transition properly. And also within C69, First Nations, Indigenous people are involved in both ends of that process, and for the first time ever in Canadian history. And I agree with Michele. This is a very complex issue because we did pass C69, and we did build and are building a pipeline. What we have to recognize is this is a transportation issue, not a production issue. And the transport by pipeline is significantly less risky than on rail, and significantly less invasive to the environment than by tanker trucks. Currently, we have one customer for our oil. This is the other side of the economic argument, the United States, and it pays less than the international market for our oil. And as a result of that, in short, the industry needs additional customers to get that fair price. We will set a limit for CO2 emissions from the energy sector so that there's not going to be any additional emissions resulting from the products going into the TMX. And we plan to sell TMX. Those that are concerned about the investment, this is something that we plan to continue to plan to divest ourselves of. we do need to transition. 100% of that revenue goes into green energy.
Thank you very much, Bryan, and each of our candidates. Let's move on to our second audience question. This comes to us from the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario. Michele, you're going to answer first, please. And the question is, how will you create green jobs that equip industry to reuse existing buildings and renew heritage infrastructure?
So the Green Recovery Plan, an important aspect of it is building retrofits and investing in that. And that would be an important element of how we would do that in terms of improving the efficiency of existing buildings. Organizations like Reep do an energy audit. So we had an energy audit done of our old house, and we're able to improve the efficiency amazingly. So that assessment kind of process, and there needs to be government investment in supporting the costs of the assessment, grants and loans available. And of course, this is another place where there would be employment and jobs in the green economy.
Thanks very much, Michele. And over to you, Bryan.
Thank you. And this is really important when we're talking about the transition from our current economy to the green economy. It's incredibly important that we focus on things like training. I've talked already this evening about the importance of ensuring we don't leave people behind. We need to invest in training so that they can do some of these jobs. I'm gonna take this in a bit of a different angle in terms of the using existing spaces. Our platform actually talks about retrofitting office spaces into affordable housing. And of course, there will be key components to do that in an environmentally sustainable way. A lot of the housing projects that we've seen here in Cambridge, the renovations of the co-ops that desperately needed support, hadn't received support for decades, a lot of it had to do with bringing these up to a particular code so that they were more efficient and more energy efficient. And I'll use an example of the from a heritage perspective, the old post office library, a real gem within our community, something I'm very proud to have been able to advocate for, getting funding to be able to bring that building back to glory and to be able to use it as a public space. Sadly, with COVID, I haven't been in there very much, but I look forward to the future where we can actually hold events back in that space.
Thanks very much, Bryan. And over to Lorne for an answer to audience question number 2.
Yeah, and it very much ties back into what I've been saying about the cooperation between the governments, because when you're talking about retrofits, I mean, it's a huge economic opportunity for folks. And I agree with Bryan when we're talking about training and investing in the trades, and so that workers have that opportunity as we transition. And like I said, when you're retrofitting older buildings, it's a huge opportunity, as well as when you build new. And then when you combine that, when you're talking about affordable housing and whatnot, we're also talking about the zoning laws and what we can do and work with the municipalities about finding space and location. I know we've talked about within our party about using federal lands, if that's an option. In conjunction with our Indigenous folks. So it's a huge opportunity. I know Michele, I'm sure you would agree that we've been talking about a green transition for a while, and Canada's kind of not there with the rest of the world about this huge economic opportunity because the innovation is there. We obviously have a very educated, mobile workforce that is in the envy of people in the world, and here in Cambridge with our manufacturing background, I just see huge opportunities for folks, as long as, like you said, Michele, we have the leadership to make it happen.
Thanks very much, Lorne, and each of our candidates on our second audience question. Our third audience question has been submitted by Anna Burr. And Bryan, you're going to answer this one first, please. Anna writes, I strongly believe that intersectionality is of utmost importance when it comes to addressing climate change. Can you demonstrate how your own work and policies approach climate change or climate justice with an intersectional lens?
And I thank her for this question. We have done a great deal of work in this area. This is something that I've been very proud to be a part of. I've been involved at not just the debate level, but really the consultation side, to really make sure that we have a lens, this type of lens on all these decisions moving forward. I am very good friends with Minister Monsef, and we've had some amazing discussions about the keys moving forward and ensuring that not just this government, but future governments will be required to have a lens, intersectionality on not just environment and climate change, but virtually everything within the federal sphere. This is something that I know can scare some of our folks that aren't on this call. They need to get their head wrapped around this real quick. This is something that is moving forward, and I'm looking forward to making sure that all Canadians are part of this conversation.
Thanks very much, Bryan. And over to you, Lorne, on audience question number 3.
Yeah, I think that's my overall theme about how we're all in this together, and we have to reach out to as many people as possible and get them, like Bryan said, wrap their head around or buy in or get involved. Like, we need to hear all the voices, everybody who's going to be affected, and some people affected one way, some more the others, but all those voices are important. So, one of the things that I was really supportive is, it's related, and I'll bring it towards in a minute when I talk about electoral reform, and getting a better representation from our elected officials from a broad spectrum of our community, and I think it would go a long way to have more voices at the table for when we have these conversations, and I'll kind of wrap that up in the end as far as my thoughts go that way. So absolutely important question to raise.
Thanks very much, Lorne. And Michele.
So intersectionality means that a woman who's Black, who's a new Canadian, who doesn't have an education and has a disability, has an extra proportionately disadvantage in comparison to, say, someone who doesn't have all those points of intersection. I have a lot of privileges, but I can say that in the time that I have been in the workforce as a woman, the workforce changed in many ways. In the early 80s, law offices were not ready for women, and the corporate world was perhaps a little bit more ready. I think that things became a little bit more compassionate, less stuck in their roles, that women actually impacted how the interaction happens. So the reality is, we need to not just have the faces of women or people who have the intersectionality. We need to make sure that they are at the table with a voice. And we may not want to hear what they have to say because they're coming from a place of a different background. So we need to make, can't guarantee a safe space, but you can make it safer. You can make it as safe as possible. And I think in Parliament, there are challenges for women. As a woman, I think that there are challenges for people of color. So there are systemic issues that we need to work on, and we need to listen to the people who represent those vulnerable populations with the intersectionality.
Okay, thank you very much, Michele. We will move on to our fourth audience question. And this is the last audience question. Lorne, you're up to answer first this time around. And this question has been submitted by Jackie Arujo. What specific suggestions do you have in making Canada a world leader in the protection and restoration of our land, air, and water? How will you tackle the corporate obstacles? Lorne, you're first.
Again, I'll reiterate that we're all in this together. Whether you're corporate, you're government, you're an individual, you're a citizen, we all have to face this crisis together. And one of the things that I've been talking about within my NDP circle is that we need to establish a climate crisis cabinet. So when I say climate crisis cabinet, I'm talking about something that's modeled after something that we saw during World War II, where we had the war cabinet, because we need to raise this issue to the highest levels of priority. This is a huge issue that has to be dealt with, and we can't wait any longer. And, I'm open to to have a non-partisan table of a cabinet, so we can hear as many views as possible. And you can expand that cabinet to encourage corporate Canada to be involved. You can encourage environmental groups, scientists, and lawmakers. But we need to raise it to that level. We need to have the leadership to make those decisions, because, like Michele has said, I think Bryan agrees, we're running out of time. We need to make bold initiatives and be straight with people about what this is going to take.
Thanks, Lorne. And Michele, you're next on audience question number 4.
So Lorne, I'm glad you raised the idea of that cabinet. It came out of the 2019 platform of the Green Party. And we do love the way the NDP endorses our ideas, although academically a little footnote would be in order, but it's all among friends. So yeah, Bryan, challenge. Can you convince Justin? Or maybe we'll just have Anna-Mee be in charge and she can create the cabinet. But really, it is a serious crisis. We do need to work together. And some of the best political results in Canada happened during minority governments. That's where we got our Medicare. And so maybe Canadians are entitled to a minority government when they vote for a minority government, if it continues to work. And maybe we need to start exploring creative new ways of collaborating and working together. I think what ultimately needs to happen is government needs to provide the leadership. It's not a machine. We're not priming a pump. We're not getting things started by increments. It needs to be bold, and we need to create conditions for local businesses. Local businesses are tied into the community, multinationals, not so much. We need to create conditions for those local businesses, the innovative businesses, the green businesses to flourish. And we need to really roll up our sleeves and work together.
Okay, thank you very much, Michele. And Bryan.
Thank you. And I think there's a couple of different pillars to the solution for this and an answer to this. Quite frankly, the last 6 years, one of the constants that I have seen within my party is that every decision has a environmental lens component to it. And I think, right from the very beginning, when we committed to putting a price on pollution, for example, if a province wasn't going to do it, we were going to step in. Now, we didn't have to do that right away with Ontario because we had a cap and trade system, and we have a government right now that decided to get rid of that. So we stepped in immediately to ensure that every province is part of the solution moving forward, and that's that corporate angle, right? We know that I mentioned Veriform. There's many companies around all across Canada that are recognizing the need to evolve. And not only are they evolving, they're saving money. There's a competitive. We've been saying this for 6 years now. There is a competitive advantage for doing this, and recognizing that you will ultimately not have a customer if you don't. So the corporations, and I'll point to the auto sector. The auto sector, when I was first involved in the auto caucus, I can remember sitting down with the big three, and they were telling me nobody wants an electric vehicle. This was not that long ago, and now the script is flipped. You see GM moving towards 85% of their vehicles being electric or fully electric moving forward. And I think this is, corporations realize the writing's on the wall, and we need to continue to put the money towards solving this problem, which I've already demonstrated in an earlier question is already being done.
Okay, thank you very much, Bryan, and thank you again to all of our candidates for answering a total now of 13 questions here this evening. 4 from our audience, 8 that were preset, and of course that rapid response question. We have arrived at the opportunity for each of you to provide us with some concluding remarks. So we will continue in the same order, meaning Michele will begin our concluding remarks here this evening. You have 2 minutes, Michele, to provide those remarks. Please go ahead.
The Green Party of Canada is part of political parties, tradition of Green parties around the world. There are nations where the Green Party is in government, and they are far more progressive and far ahead of Canada on dealing with the climate crisis and being ready for the green economy. Cambridge needs a green voice in Ottawa. The party is grassroots. Policies are evidence-based. We listen. We're all about sustainability. We're the party of innovation. We are a voice that pushes those in power. We are a voice that inspires other parties to adopt ideas from our platform. But if you actually vote for me, it'll be a lot faster. And this is an urgent issue. The Green Recovery Plan doesn't, put economy against the environment. It says, yes, we can have both. And in fact, it's urgent that we have a green economy and that we need to look after people. The pandemic has shown us a lot of weaknesses in the system, and ecosystems and social systems are similar. The time for new growth is not while the forest is mature, it's after a forest fire, after a flood. After the pandemic is the time for a green recovery plan. It is the time for the Green New Deal. It is the time to, I know you don't want this word, to pivot and become much, much more green. The Green Party has the boldest goals and the boldest plan. And I am a person who will speak out and look after Cambridge. Vote for me is a vote for your grandchildren's grandchildren.
Thank you very much, Michele. Bryan, concluding remarks from you.
Thank you all for joining us this evening. Canadians have experienced a once-in-a-generation pandemic. The choices that the federal government made played a huge role in our resilience through COVID-19. So as we finish the fight against COVID-19, let's build back better together. Our record speaks for itself. While others were advocating for austerity, or advocating against masks, or against vaccines, or against helping those who needed it, we were fighting for you. Our recovery is working. We've supported Canadians from financial and employment-related pressures through it all. Through it all, we've been taking aggressive action on the environment, doing more than any government in history. Canadians can choose to continue with a proven plan, our plan, and we can keep making progress together. We can go backwards. We can't go backwards. We need to maintain the price on pollution. We need to end fossil fuel subsidies. We must continue to plant trees and preserve our ecosystems. We have to cut and cap emissions from oil and gas sectors. We must ensure the green recovery and society and the social just recovery are available for every Canadian. We must keep protecting our oceans, waterways, and sensitive environments. We've already spent $3.6 billion in protecting our natural environments and species, and we're not done yet. But this election isn't just about the environment. We want you to take a look at our whole platform. If you don't want to see us return to the old playbook of cuts, stopping the progress in childcare and ignoring housing issues, I need your support. Let's build a better future that gives everyone a real and fair chance at success. And that's why I need your support. I need your vote on September 20th. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bryan. And to conclude our concluding remarks, Lorne.
Yeah, I'd like to echo Bryan's sentiments and thank the Reep Green Solutions for this opportunity. I'd like to thank my fellow panelists. And like I said earlier, when we began, I learned a lot just from listening to you folks make your points. I just want to reiterate that the fact that I've been fighting for the issues, for my family, for my neighbors, for my coworkers for over a decade, all those issues that are really important. I don't hesitate to talk to elected officials, no matter what party they are. I'm very passionate about what I believe in, and I'll give the voice to those who maybe feel they don't have a voice when it comes to policy. I've also tried to strive and look at any piece of legislation or any proposed policy through the lens of sustainability. And when I say that, I see, from an environmental, economic, and social sustainability. Quite often it's I'll look at a problem and solve it right now during my watch, but I'm not looking at it for 4, 8, 12 years from now. So it has to make sense of the moment, but also in the long term. And what we talk about as legislators, we always have to go, what does it mean to people? What does it mean to a working family? How does it affect their lives? Is it a good thing, or is it just a stopgap measure? And that's the approach I will take as your MP. And once again, I'd like to thank the opportunity, because we've all been dealing with the struggles and the challenges of having an election during a pandemic, which it's not over yet, my friends.
Okay, and Lorne, we thank you very much for that. This brings us to the end of our debate for tonight. So allow me just to take this moment to thank each of our candidates, Lorne Bruce with the NDP, Michele Braniff with the Green Party, and Bryan May with the Liberals, for your participation in an excellent conversation, which is part of this national project. I've covered a lot of elections over the years, and I find that I don't tire of this sort of thing. The accessibility that you have provided to us tonight and the audience that is with us here on Zoom really is our system and our democracy at its finest. So my sincere thanks to you for being a part of this and allowing us to hear your voices firsthand. Thank you also to the organizations who have been involved in making sure this debate and others like it across the country and the region happened here tonight. This event was jointly hosted by the Rare Charitable Reserve, Reep Green Solutions, Waterloo Region Nature, the Grand River Environmental Network, Nith Valley EcoBoosters, Sustainable Waterloo Region, and GreenPAC. Thanks to all of our audience members as well for demonstrating support for the environment as an important issue in the federal election. And remember, please get out and vote in the upcoming election. September the 20th is the date, so your voice can be heard. Thank you again to each and every one of you, and please do enjoy the rest of your night. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mike.